Unlocking cyber knowledge one episode at a time. This is Gnosis by Smartcomply Academy.
Good day, everyone. Welcome to the kickoff of our very first educational podcast called Gnosis by Smartcomply Academy. This is going to be a comprehensive podcast that will equip you with the knowledge and resources required for implementing cyber and information security within your organization. And you will also be able to take an assessment and get certified by logging into academy.smartcomply.com. My name is Olusola Oyekola, and I will be your host for this ISO 27001 podcast series. And if you have ever wondered how organizations protect their sensitive information or why ISO 27001 is such a big deal, then this course is for you. Joining me today is Oluwaseyi Akilude, an expert in cyber and information security. Welcome, Mr. Sheyi. It's a pleasure to have you take us through the provisions of the ISO 27001. How are you doing today, sir?
I'm very well, thank you. Thank you for having me here. It's been a pleasure to be here as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, so starting with the first episode, which is fundamentals of ISO 27001. What exactly is ISO 27001, and why do you think organizations should care about it?
So ISO is an international organization for standardization, which is an independent, non-governmental international organization that develop and publish standards for a wide range of industries. So what they literally do is different industries, they provide standards for different industries. And why is standards important? Standard helps to regulate your practices. So instead of you doing things the way you like, in a nutshell, it helps you to regulate your activities, what you're supposed to do, what you should do first, what you shouldn't do. So it provides that structure into your operations within an organization. It helps standardize. And if you violate those standards or those operations, then you definitely face a fine. So ISO provide different regulating standards for different industries. So they are for AI, they have for cloud, they have for information security management systems. So it cut across multiple different industries, as the case may be. So there's some of them for cybersecurity. So the standards just cut across different industries. So it helps those different industries to regulate their practices as well.
Wonderful. And, we hear a lot about information security these days. And how do you think it differs from cybersecurity? And what makes information security unique?
Okay, so for information security, it's a very buzzword that a lot of people tend to use haphazardly. So some people say cybersecurity, some people say information security. So they think they are saying the same thing, but they are not. So what does information security speak to? So information security allows you to be able to look at what we call confidentiality, integrity, and availability of your information. So it cuts across all spheres of information. Looking at it from physical security, looking at it from all other aspects of information security. So it's not only just digital data. It looks across digital data and then focuses on also on your physical data as well. But cybersecurity is a niche within information security because it tends to protect your digital assets. So cybersecurity cuts across your networks, it speaks to your cloud endpoint, network security. So it cuts across protecting your digital assets. So your digital assets mean that assets that are not tangible. Okay, so data that you have on your hard drive, for example, those are digital assets. So those type of assets or those types of information is what cybersecurity tends to protect against. So what information security cuts across the whole ecosystem. So what I'm trying to say in a nutshell is that cybersecurity is embedded within information security, but they are not. You can't call them the same thing. They're quite both different.
That's very enlightening. And I think you made mention of the three key principles that ISO 27001 is built around. Can you please break them down for us? We have the confidentiality, integrity, and availability.
Yeah. So what those three things speaks to? So confidentiality speaks to ensuring that only authorized users or systems can access information. So let me give a typical example. Just using it in a broader sense, for example, you want somebody to come visit you in your house, for example. If somebody is coming to visit in your house, probably you must have given the person an access key. And then only if the person can present the access key at the gate, or you give the person the code at the gate, for example. So once the person gets to the gate, they ask the person, can you show us your code? If the person presents you the actual code, then that means that you've actually authorized that person, okay, to be able to gain access. However, there's still some cybersecurity attacks, against those type of attack against confidentiality. We're going to look into that, separately. But in a nutshell, confidentiality just ensures that only authorized users can gain access to information within an organization. So it could be a user, it could be a system, it could be an application, it could be an API, it could be anything. But the most important thing is just to ensure that the user or the system trying to gain access is actually authorized to be able to gain that access. And then for integrity speaks to ensuring that data is not modified, that your data you have is actually the actual data that you're supposed to have. So in a nutshell, the way it's been, explained is that it's ensured that data is not modified in transit, so to speak. That data you have is not actually modified. So integrity speaks to ensuring that the data you send is also the data you receive at the other end. So there's no tampering or alteration in between. And each of these different principles also suffers specific types of attacks. So there's some attacks that are geared towards integrity, okay, attacking the integrity of your information system. And then finally is availability, which actually speaks to ensuring that your resources are always available at any time that it's been needed. And what that also means is that each of these different principles have different attacks that is targeted towards them. So a typical example of an availability type of attack is denial of service attack. So let's say you have a web server, and that web server is attacked in such a way that you can't access that web server anymore. That type of attack is considered as an availability type of attack because it allows you to be able to have access to that resource. Okay. So for integrity, I know I didn't mention for integrity. So for integrity, it means that an attack that modifies your data. So one of them is man in the middle attack. So what you're sending is not what you're receiving. Okay, there's somebody altering that information in between. So those are the principles, and what organizations are trying to do is to ensure that they safeguard their environment against attack that targeted each of those different principles.
Wow. So we have been able to talk about the key principles, and you also made mention of some of the attacks that applies to each of these principles. And what would you think are the most top security risks that organizations face today, and how does ISO 27001 help mitigate all of these risks?
Okay, so for most of so attacks generally it is usually targeted towards attacks are more it tilts towards more industry based. Let me use that for example. So now a banking system, the type of attack that will be geared towards a banking system will be different from an attack that will be geared towards an hospital, for example, an healthcare system, for example. So most those attacks they vary, but let me just speak to general attacks. So one of them is phishing, for example. Organizations pay thousands of dollars to ensure that their users are educated, cybersecurity awareness, so that they don't fall prey to some of these type of attacks. And some of them attacks, again, ransomware attacks, is also part of those type of attacks where your critical data is encrypted and the attacker is asking you for financial resources. Okay, a password attack is also part of it as well. Access control type of attack whereby users password attacks are being compromised, and then it's being used to be able to gain access into specific information within the organization. So distributed denial of service attack is also another type of attack whereby it targets towards availability, whereby specific resources are being shut down, critical assets are being shut down because of multiple probes that is being sent to those services. So the attacks cut across different types of industry. So different type of industry will definitely have, and that's where things like matter attack framework plays a major role, because now we educate organizations about these are the type of attacks that you're prone to because of the type of industry you belong to. So you get to learn about different tactics, techniques, procedures, and things like that. So, but these are just common base attacks that organizations tend to fight against.
Okay, thank you very much. So you have mentioned a whole lot of measures that can be put in place, and I know
Yeah.
there is also the place of conducting gap assessments, ensuring that you can identify all of the loopholes that you have within your environment, within your infrastructure. But when it comes to implementing all of these frameworks, especially the ISO 27001, what
Yeah.
does that process actually look like?
So there are two ways to implement ISO 27001. So firstly, if you there's something we call recertification. If you've already gone through the certification process for the first time and then you're trying to recertify it. So in those places, you might want to do things like gap analysis, just to say, okay, where are the gaps in the already existing controls that I have, and then you go ahead and implement those gaps, cover those risks, and then implement those gaps, and then call for an external auditor to recertify you, and then you get your certification. But if you're implementing it from scratch, it's another ballgame entirely, because now you have to start looking at all of the different requirements that you need to meet, start looking at the controls you need to put in place. And the honest truth is that implementing ISO 27001 especially for new organizations, it's quite financial. It requires financial resources, because if you don't have some specific controls in place, you will have to get new tools. And if you're purchasing tools, you have to look at the operational costs, you have to look at capex
Yes.
costs, you have to see, do you need to employ new employees, you have to look at your skill gap, you have to implement some security awareness program. So it's there are different measures for different type of organizations. So, but most of the first thing is that if it's a new organization, the first thing is you want to do a gap analysis. Okay, where are we now? Do we have any existing control in place? And then you use your gap analysis to project, this is where we're supposed to be from an ISO point of view. And then you start looking at getting control. And in that process, you also need to look at management buy-in, because it requires a lot of resources. You need to have your management buy-in for you to be able to have a successful ISO 27001 implementation.
Thank you very much for that. So lately, there have been some controversies about
Okay.
the aspect of auditing some of the clauses and some of the controls that we have within the ISO 27001. There have been
Okay.
some people saying that you're actually not meant to audit the controls, but you are meant to actually look at the statements of applicability, and
Okay.
you are able to assess the controls that are applicable to the organization. So I would just want you to walk us through it, and what is the structure, and why does it actually matter?
Okay, so now, so I'm going to look at it from two ways. So the first
Yes.
way is that, when it comes to audit, everybody is always, very careful, try to keep the line in, keep their homes in order, But the truth is that if you really, really want to do a proper audit, those controls you said you have in place should actually be verified. It's not just to just come with a list of checklist questions and just ask, do you have access control? Yes, check. Do you have endpoint security? Yes, check. Do you run vulnerability assessment? Yes, check. Do you have a threat intelligence? Yes, no. It doesn't work that way. Most times you really, really have to go there, interview the employees, let me see the controls you have in place, and then the assessor would then definitely have to look at even the gaps in the control you said you've implemented. All right. So many organizations try to just find to do some shady approach to it, but that won't give you the actual approach when it comes to implementing. And when it comes to implementing, but when it comes to auditing ISO, you audit it from a point of the clauses. Actually, you look at all of the 10 clauses and then you audit it, because the 10 clauses from an ISO standard speaks to a shall verb statement. It means it's mandatory. But the thing is that from the control point of view, you can't implement all the controls. I mean, ISO 27001, the latest version has 93 controls. And what organizations do is you have to do what we call scoping and tailoring to be able to say, okay, out of these controls, which one applies to us? Okay, so you have to look at your control and look at the one who applies to you, and then you apply them. So when an auditor is looking at you, your auditor is not ensuring that you must have all the 93 controls. No, but all of the clauses, you must meet some mandatory requirements. There's some mandatory requirements you need to meet. You need to have access control. You need to have your policies in place. You need to look at how do you run your assessment, vulnerability assessment. So you need to provide some of these external reporting, like your consultant reports that speaks to if you run a penetration test or if you have a vulnerability assessment. So it cut across all of those different dimension when it comes to auditing an organization for ISO 27001. So, but the core thing is those 10 clauses, you need to meet all the requirements because it's a verb statement from the ISO standard. It's a shall, but the control is should. You should just, it's based on your discretion. But all of those requirements, you must definitely meet them from a clause point of view.
Mm. Thank you very much for that. And I think over time, we have been able to establish that ISO 27001 is one of the top frameworks that organizations are usually aiming for. And what do you think are the key steps that are involved in getting certified to the ISO 27001?
Okay, so the first step is that number one, you need to get the standard. If you want to get certified for ISO 27000, you need to purchase the standard. So the standard comes with the two documents you will get. The first one speaks to ISO 27001 standard that has all of the clauses that you must understand. And then the second one is the guide, implementation guide, which is the ISO 27002, which helps you to implement those controls against your ISO 27001 standard. So that's the first thing the organization needs to do. And then when you do that, you also need to allocate resources from an organization point of view, because when you're implementing ISO, it requires resources. You have to get some new tools. You have to ensure that some resources are available from a financial point of view. So those step-by-step approach is also very, very important. And then you're going to also need to get an organization that will help you implement ISO 27001, or that will walk you through the process, which is also comes with the financial implication as well. Then you also need to do some risk assessment. You also need to do things like gap analysis to know where you are and to know how you can get to where you're going to. So all of those different gaps, you also need to allocate resources in terms of roles and responsibilities. Who is handling what? Which department is handling what? Where are we going to be implementing some specific roles and responsibilities? So it's actually a bouquet of different things you need to put together. But the first approach is always you get a standard, get a consulting company that can help you implement it, which Smartcomply provide those services. So they can walk you through all of this process, and then at the end of the day, you can then get an external consultant to be able to walk you through getting the certification itself.
Thank you very much. So you have been able to mention quite a couple of steps that they are able to follow. But then I think the worry for most organizations is usually about the time and effort that is required to implement all of these clauses and controls. And how long do you think that this process would actually take to achieve certification to the ISO 27001?
Well, it also depends on the readiness of the organization and how much of time they are willing to put into it. Because, for example, one of the requirements is you need to have some ISMS policies. And if, for example, you don't have an ISMS policy, it's not something you can just sit down and just craft out and say, okay, let's do it now. You have to look at your organization. Which environment are you trying to scope towards? If you have multiple organizations, what are the standard you're also trying to benchmark against? So it depends on the readiness of the organization in terms of allocation of resources. So what I've seen is some people do a rigorous, 2 weeks. I think I've seen people get it done within 2 weeks. But that is a very, very rigorous step, But I've seen people, I've seen people go ahead to get it done within 2 weeks. But some take 6 months. Some can even take as much as a year because of the kind of peculiarity of their environment. So if you have to put some specific controls, for example, you have to wait for shipping, you have to pay. If you have to get a firewall, for example, let's say you have to purchase a firewall to secure your perimeter, and you're doing a physical firewall, you're not doing a virtual firewall, for example, you have to pay a particular vendor, you have to wait for shipping, you have to do racking. So it does really, really take time, to be able to do that. So it all depends on the readiness of the organization and how far. But I've seen people, go ahead to, depending on how fast they want their things to be done and the kind of environment. So if you're in the cloud space, for example, because you're going to be implementing controls, those controls are going to be spin up as fast as possible because you're in the cloud space. But if you're not in the cloud space, for example, you would have to wait to get the physical equipment, which would take a couple of time, custom duties, and all of those type of things. So some do it 2 weeks, some 3 months, but it does just depend on the organization providing resources and how critical it is to the organization and the timelines they've set. Because the one thing I also wanted to add is ISMS or ISO 27001 is always considered, should be seen as a project actually, because it's something that you have to have a project manager, You need to have a charter, and then you have to have timelines and all of those things. So it's not something that you just treat as something that's endless. It needs to have its start time and a end time. So those are a couple of peculiarities you also have to look into it. But at least maximum a year or thereabout.
Nice. So while you were talking about the peculiarities of the environment, something else came to my mind.
Okay.
Do you think that the size of the company actually would affect the timing of getting certified to the ISO 27001? Does the size actually matter in this
Yes,
situation?
this size actually does matter. If you have a company that's just 5 employees, it's quite easy because you're just going to interview just 5 people, and then you have a way of doing your things within yourself. But if you have a global organization where you have to interview, although it's not like when you're doing your ISO, you have to interview the whole organization though. But
Yes.
depending on the structure of the organization, it also plays a major role. So a company that has a bigger size, it has its advantage because now from a resource point of view, a company of maybe 100 or 200 would definitely have a lot of financial resources that they can invest in implementing ISO 27001. So but from an implementation point of view, size really does matter. The size could be to your advantage, and it could be a problem because if you're interacting with an organization that is not well structured, you're trying to book a time with maybe the HR is not available. You're trying to book a time with the CTO, the CTO is not available. So it has its
Yes.
own, if you look at the dynamics, it has its own pros and cons, but definitely the size would definitely affect how far and how well in terms of timing when you complete the implementation of ISO.
Thank you very much for that. So, apart from security, what are some other business benefits of ISO 27001, and how do you think this actually relates to other compliance frameworks like the PCI DSS, like the SOC 2, like the GDPR, and other frameworks that we have?
Okay, so from my experience, one of the things I've observed is that most of the reason why organizations, go for ISO or some of the standard implementation is just to provide credibility to their customers. So the customers can know that okay, my information is safe with you, and then you're doing business from a standard point of view. So meaning that based on the controls you've implemented in place, the chances of you suffering from cyber attacks is quite minimal because now you've already put in controls in place. And then, some also do it for bragging rights, actually, just to put it on their website to attract more customers. And then also from a compliance point of view as well, just to show that, okay, we're compliant with regulatory standards. We are a law-abiding organization. And so it helps the organization it helps, potential customers to also say, okay, this company is they've done their due diligence, they've made some investments in information security, so it boosts customers' confidence about them. And some people also do that. Maybe you're a startup, you just want to validate that your product is reliable, your product has gone through specific checks, and then they are able to handle all of your information that they're going to be receiving from you based on the fact of what the application is meant to do. So that cut across multiple, even for PCI DSS, for banking industries, for example, if you don't have your PCI DSS, you can't even do banking transaction, card transactions. So all of those things, it's more from a business point of view. Most organizations do more from a business point of view, as compared to solely because of security.
So, how do you think the controls from the ISO 27001 relate to other frameworks like the PCI DSS and also some other frameworks that we have like the SOC 2, the GDPR, which is for the data protection regulation? How do you think these controls connect and relate to each other?
Okay, so from a control point of view, so some of those controls, they address specific aspects of information security in general. So let me use access control for example. Access control requires that you must authorize, or you must have an authentication. Users can't just gain access. So there's a system in place that will determine if they can gain access. So that cuts across multiple different standards. So for PCI DSS, the same thing applies to it. For GDPR, the same thing applies to it. So all of those different standards have their different requirements. But if you can implement 1, 2, 3, 4, you still find those same requirements in each of some of those similar regulatory standards as well. So From an implementation point of view, an organization that is ISO compliant or that is ISO certified would definitely be able to get certified for PCI DSS, for example, because the controls are kind of very much similar. So,
Much,
for example, if you're doing, if you're processing card, for example, if you're processing for PCI, you're processing card, you need to ensure
yes.
that your server that is processing that card is actually very secure. So you have to be looking at using secure protocols when communicating in between those servers. So your SSH, you shouldn't be using non-secure protocols like Telnet, for example. So and those clauses are also part of what you have in your ISO standard as well. So there are a lot of similar controls, that you have in each of those different standards. So you're just going to be doing maybe a few additional controls that is peculiar
Control.
to this particular standard. Yeah. So those are my observations as regards, getting compliant with multiple standards, just by implementing just one single control or one single standard within your organization. It helps you to be able to, pivot into all of those different standards and be able to get compliant as well.
Mm. Thank you very much for that. I think another thing that I would like you to shed more light on would be the data protection regulations as well. So when it comes to data protection, because the ISO 27001 is known to be a very comprehensive framework, and some of these controls, some of the clauses that we have would also kind of relate to data protection practices, data privacy, and I just wanted to shed more light on this as well. Does this cover data protection? Does the controls cover data privacy? And how does it relate to the GDPR framework as well?
Okay, so from a data protection point of view, so one of the things for data protection is that users must be able to have an opportunity to be able to provide consent for you to be able
Consent,
to
yeah.
use their data as well. So if you're doing ISO 27001, I can't actually, to be honest, I can't really remember that particular control that applies to it.
Yes.
But there are some specific controls that you can actually implement in ISO 27001 that will still protect you against that. So from an HR point of view, for example, HR require that you sign some specific document about your data, about your data being processed by another third party and all of that. So those controls you implement around those specific area also help you to provide that same controls when it comes to looking at it from a data protection point of view as well.
Thank you very much. And I think there is something else that is coming to mind when it
Okay.
comes to implementation of the ISO 27001 controls.
Yeah.
Is this just meant for one department? Most organizations would have a compliance department that will take care of all of these implementations and the audits. Do you think that the involvement of every other department actually has to factor into this process? And we need to consider that everybody contributes and they are actively a part of the implementation process for the ISO 27001.
Yes. So ISO 27001 is not just about maybe because people hear the word controls, they feel like everything there speaks to just implementing technical controls, but no,
Yes.
you have to involve all the stakeholders. Your legal team also has to be part of it. Your disaster recovery team needs to be part of it. Your technical teams also need to be part of it. Your compliance team also needs to be part of it because you have to do internal audit as well. So it cuts across having multiple teams on board. So it doesn't just speak to just having the CTO or ISMS officer or your technical guys only on that board. No, it cuts across having, because one of the things you'll be doing, you'll be interviewing even the leadership. You have to interview the leadership. Can we see your organogram? How about your reporting line? How does it work? Who reports to who? What if this person is not available? What happens? So you start considering risk from the top to the bottom. So you
Yes.
can't go and speak to, when you want to speak about organogram, when you're talking about the leadership, when you want to understand the context of the organization, you can't go and meet the CTO and start asking that question. You
Yes.
definitely have to speak with the management team. So speak with somebody, that is top, maybe the CEO, the VP of the organization, or you might have to speak with HR, because you also have to look at the HR as well, human resource security as well. So there are different, clauses that you have to look at. Things around disaster recovery. How do you manage security incidents? Another person would have to be the one to provide you with answers as regards that.
Yes.
How do you manage your vulnerability management? How do you look at threat intelligence? How do you look at your access control? What about your topologies? Your
Yes.
data center. So you have to speak to different teams. It's not just one person, sits, because one person can definitely answer all of these questions. So from my
Yeah.
experience,
Yeah.
what happens is you schedule some interview time with specific people from different departments, maybe 1 hour, 30 minutes, and all of that. People that are actually involved in the entire process. So it's not a one-man show. It involves speaking to multiple teams because it's for the entire organization. It doesn't cut across only technical things. It speaks to those different areas within the organization as well.
Thank you very much. And I think this would kind of relate to the assignments of ISMS champions as
Okay.
well. And I also want to believe that when it comes to the trainings for these champions, I mean, they are meant to be the ones to spearhead
Yeah.
this communication process and also the implementation process in every department that we have within the organization. So what is the connection between considering all of these departments in the implementation process and also the assignment of the ISMS champions?
Okay, so the role of the ISMS champion is to champion specific domain within the process. So what happens is that you have, for example, you're implementing, you want to look at things around cybersecurity awareness, for example.
Yes.
You need to have a champion that is going to spearhead that conversation or is going to spearhead that whole process as well. So the ISMS champion doesn't necessarily even have to be working with the consultant, to implement it, but it's going to be someone that will be responsible for providing information as to getting some of these things done. So the person will be responsible to speaking with their team members. Have you done this? Have you done that? Have you done this? We just send this out. Please encourage the members of the team to be able to get it done. So when implementing ISMS, each of those different controls or different clauses, you definitely have somebody that you can speak to, or somebody that can manage, or that somebody that you're responsible to, or that provides that one-on-one interaction with the people that you're supposed to get information from. So the ISMS champion plays actually a major role because the ISMS champion definitely know their people. If you're conducting interview with HR, for example, you can't just walk in and say, I want to speak. Those champions help you to facilitate some of those processes and make your work go really, really fast and smooth as well.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for that. I think another question that I would actually love to ask you is,
Okay.
when it comes to implementing all of these controls, right? Organizations are usually looking for people who have a very vast knowledge of the ISO 27001. And I think what I would want to ask now is, what is the level of qualification that would be required for someone to be an ISMS champion or maybe a lead implementer for the ISO 27001?
Well, so for ISO, there are a couple of certifications that are out there for you to become a lead ISO implementer. One of them is PECB. I know PECB offers courses for you to become an ISO lead implementer. I think there's another one, BSI or something like that, and then also BCI, if I'm not mistaken. So some of those organizations have specific certification process that they tend to offer for you to become a licensed, lead implementer, to be able to implement ISO 27001 as well. And then there are also some external organizations that have affiliates with the ISO themselves that helps them to be able to certify that, okay, this organization is ready to be able to can be, I'm trying to look for the word, is in conformity to be able to receive an ISO an ISO 27001 certification as well. So it's always like that. But if somebody wants to be an implementer, definitely we'll have to go through this kind of course, understand the requirements, understand the rudiment of what needs to be done. And then once you go for certification, because if you don't have certification, it becomes difficult for you to be able to go ahead and do the implementation, because the organization will definitely ask you, are you certified? You can't say, yes, I know it, but they won't consider you, even though you know it. they will still consider it. Just like you saying that I know how to fly a plane, but I don't have a license of a pilot. Nobody will want to fly a plane, you know.
Yeah, I will
Nobody,
definitely not
no,
fly the
nobody will
plane.
endanger their life because okay, I know I like you. I know you're working towards becoming somebody great, but I won't risk my life, you know, in those kind of situations. So the same thing happens. Yeah, the same thing happens, you know, when you're trying to implement ISO 27001 as well.
Thank you very much. So when it comes to getting the skills, the knowledge, I
Mm-hmm,
mean,
mm-hmm.
what do you think the learners, our audience, what do you think they can expect from you from this podcast series to ensure that they can also get a very sound knowledge of the ISO 27001, how it works, the implementation process, and the certification steps as well?
Yeah, so what I would definitely gain is we've actually, you know, been able to craft a hands-on, you know, experience that anybody who wants to go ahead to implement ISO 27001 need to be aware of. You know, looking at understanding even the structure of the annex clause. What are the 10 clauses that you need to know when it comes to implementing ISO? What are the types of control you need to implement? How can you help an organization from a project management point of view, you know, helping them to navigate? Because another thing, again, you also have to consider resources as well. How can you help an organization to navigate through the process to be able to get certified? When you start looking at things around RACI, responsibility, accountability, consulting, and what's the last one again? Informed. So you have to look at, you know, the ways, and we've all actually crafted all of this in the course. So the course is actually very rich, which would allow you to be able to gain the hands-on experience that you need to be able to, you know, work an organization through the process. Even though you might not be implementing, but at least you have an understanding of how it works, and then you can guide the organization through the process. So you can even be an ISMS champion, you know, because of the knowledge you have, and then you can provide adequate feedback when speaking with consultants as regards what needs to be implemented here, why are we implementing this here, we feel this and that, you know. So the course has 10 modules, and then it's each of the modules attacks specific areas of how you can implement ISO 27001, and definitely it's going to be a course you will definitely enjoy, and it's going to add much value to you as well.
Thank you very much. We already know that you have a lot in store for us, and we are very excited for the journey, and we are very happy to have you walk us through all of these provisions as well. And I think at this point, I need to thank you, and also to say that that was very enlightening. And I think I would also like to say that I'm very sure that the audience, they have been able to learn quite a few, and also unlearn some things that they believe to be the process for implementing ISO 27001. And I think if you have any questions for him, you are also able to drop it in the comments. And when it comes to the fundamentals of ISO 27001, we have been able to cover the basics, let you know what are some of the informations that are required when it comes to having the baseline knowledge of implementing ISO 27001. And before we sign off, here is an important message for you. There is a wealth of knowledge where we come from, and it's all on the Smartcomply Academy platform. And you are able to log in at academy.smartcomply.com. You're able to choose a course that interests you, and you're able to get certified on it as well. Just like Oluwaseyi had mentioned earlier, you would need to get a certificate to prove that you are a certified ISO 27001 implementer. It is a very important requirement. This is Gnosis by Smartcomply Academy, unlocking cyber knowledge one episode at a time. I remain your host, Olusola. See you in the next episode, and bye for now.